How can you take something that's often dry and boring like B2B content and make it fun and engaging? That is the question I'm answering along with Owain Lloyd-Williams on this week's episode of Search With Candour.
If we're going to make an impact here from SEO, we have to think outside the box. And also the data is showing us, that's already super competitive. We can't be too strict around this. We have to have a bit more fun. A lot of these industries are so saturated and they're so competitive, and all the kind of, the pillar product service keywords that we might think about. Businesses by their very nature are messy, right? Humans are messy. So if by chance a B2B startup is already performing well on a particular pillar or particular topic within that niche, that's great. The paid search team potentially save money on that.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search With Candour. I am your host, as always, Jack Chambers-Ward, and this is the podcast where I interview the best and brightest across SEO and digital marketing. This week I am joined by the one and only Owain Lloyd-Williams. And Owen and I, we followed each other for a little while. We had little interactions here and there on LinkedIn, but it's really, really nice to finally sit down and talk about something we have experienced in both of our careers, making B2B content, and specifically when you get a subject or a topic or an industry that is particularly dry or particularly legally restrictive or whatever it could be, and you want to make it fun, you want to make it engaging, you want to make unique, interesting content that doesn't feel dry and boring like sometimes some subjects can. That's exactly what Owen and I are talking about. We're going to share our experiences, share some ideas, some strategies to help you if you're working with B2B clients and if you're working in the B2B industry in general, to create fun and engaging content. And before my conversation with Owen, I would really, really appreciate if you could go and like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment, and of course you can follow and leave a 5-star review on Spotify. And you can leave reviews on basically any podcast platform of your choice, whether you're listening on Audible or Apple Podcasts or whatever it is. I would hugely appreciate any engagement and support you can give the show. That basically helps us get bigger numbers, get more listeners, get higher in those charts on the podcast platforms, and basically allows me to keep doing this show for longer and make it bigger and better in the future. And now, without any further ado, here is my conversation with Owain Lloyd-Williams. My guest this week is an SEO consultant with over a decade of experience in digital marketing. During his time in the industry, he has consulted across various different businesses and industries in both in-house and agency roles. He's a well-rounded SEO, also specializing in e-commerce and China SEO, which is something I'm sure we'll be talking about in the future. Outside of SEO, just in case you are a bit of a hipster indie kid in the 2010s, you might recognize him from Empty Echoes. And if you're a shoegazer who loves Japan like I do, you might recognize him from Morning in Akamara. Welcome to the show, Owain Lloyd-Williams.
Thank you so much for that long and voluptuous intro, Jack. I mean, those bands, you're sort of rolling back the years there. That was like a very short-lived, MTV was a very short-lived shoegaze band in China when I lived out there. The Morning and Akamara thing is like a little side project I've got going on now. Wow. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the intro.
I like to do my research, and I'm pleased you described my intro as voluptuous. That's how I'm going to describe them from now on.
Also, sure if it's quite the right word, but it's nice. I'm a very wordy.
I'll take it. I'll take it, mate. I'll take it. Absolutely. And funny enough, like genuinely, I'm a big shoegaze guy. So I was listening to some Morning and Akamara when I was typing up our show notes yesterday. So felt like appropriate kind of like focusy kind of backgroundy music. I find a lot of that like shoegaze or like heavier stuff like doom metal, the real like drone metal type stuff really helps me kind of like focus stuff. But I need that kind of thing focusing my ADHD brain to actually get stuff done. So I appreciated the accompaniment as well.
Yeah, 100%. I have the same thing in terms of that need for focus. You know, I think like shoegaze, ambient music particularly. I listen to a lot like Brian Eno. There's a band. It's like a music project. By the way, we're sort of going off tangent already. I love it. But there's a guy. I don't know if you ever watched Salad Fingers, the cartoon, back in like the early 2000s.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
A guy called David Firth. He's got a music project called Locust Toy Box, which is like kind of sort of dark ambient. It's a bit like Aphex Twin. That's like kind of my go-to if I'm doing a deep audit or doing some writing. That's my kind of, it just triggers something in my brain just to focus. So it's a great genre of music to get stuff done, I think.
For sure. The fact that we're making Salad Fingers references 2 minutes into the podcast, mate, We're off to a good start. I am on board. We'll try not to talk about too many rusty spoons over the next 45 minutes or so, but no promises. No promises. Well, we are actually here to talk about something that is near and dear to my career and my heart, and I know something you have a lot of experience with, which is making B2B content fun. And as much as the kind of B2B sales memes have kind of taken over LinkedIn at this point, I think a lot of what people experience with B2B content is it's dry and boring, right? And that's kind of what our mission is in today's episode, is to explain how they can make it fun, give some examples, and talk about some strategies and tips to make it engaging for you as a creator and an SEO, and for your audience as well, hopefully at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff to talk about. I think, first of all, I just want to caveat, I know there's plenty of amazing B2B creators in the SEO community. They're doing great SaaS tools, loads of interesting stuff going on there. So I don't want to kind of completely already kind of alienate myself from all the people that are doing great stuff. Of course, also Ask is a prime example of that. But yes, you're right. I mean, it does often kind of fall under that topic, and we can get into it shortly, of being a bit dry, being a bit kind of, I guess, uptight in terms of regulation, all kinds of stuff, and obviously quite competitive too. And it can be difficult to kind of have a bit of fun, and also create interesting content. But hopefully we can get into some methods and ideas around how to have a bit more fun and hopefully a bit more success as well from an SEO standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. And funny enough, you mentioning there, like how strict it can be in terms of regulations. I funnily enough experienced that a couple of times on the show. I mentioned to you before we start recording, and I say it to every guest before we start recording, like, oh, if you mention a client name, or if you have any like privacy things, you want to keep your personal life separate, let me know ahead of time. We won't mention it. I can edit it out, whatever it is. And I once had a caveat that was, if you make a social media post about the podcast episode and tag the company I work for, it has to go through our legal team. I was like,
Right.
what? But
Yeah.
I'm writing it, like it's on my post or on the Candour profile. I'm not writing it on behalf of your company. And they're like, well, it's tough. You will get in a lot of trouble, and you get me in a lot of trouble if you do that. I was like, okay, right. I will just say Owen, and then not just say who you work from. Like, I'll just keep it super tight. I'd never experienced that before. I've always worked with
Yeah.
fairly chill companies, it seems, but I know it can get very tricky when it gets that side of things. And I think you're totally right. That's where a lot of that almost like dryness and
Mm.
reluctance to try anything new and anything interesting comes in, because you get stuck in, oh, it has to go through branding and then marketing and then the legal
Compliance.
department and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah.
Have you experienced that kind of thing where you have to have that conversation with the client and try and convince them that, hey, let's try something new, try something interesting. Let's push the boat out a little bit and try something new.
So I think that's pretty much the nail on the head with a lot of it. So I guess there's a couple of examples, and obviously B2B is like incredibly broad. It can mean all manner of different things. And I guess kind of touching on that kind of boredom, that kind of like boring side of it. For example, if you take like a big brand like, I don't know, like Samsung, which is someone I used to work for a while ago. They've got a big, interesting kind of B2C facing, it's all forward thinking. It's all things like the Galaxy Fold and Frame TV and innovations around pads, yeah, you've got one. Though I used to have one. I'm a Google Pixel
Yeah,
user now. You've got a Fold. Oh, amazing.
I've got the fold.
Which is all like, I mean, they're incredibly compliance central, by the way. I mean, we had a lot of difficulty around kind of doing sort of certain kind of content ventures, but given it was Samsung, it already kind of had a lot of kind of visibility in real estate across a lot of terms we were looking for, which are mostly branded anyway. But the B2B side of things was completely different. You kind of go from kind of exciting consumer-facing products like the Fold, like the Frame, to things like air conditioning units and business display units and things like that, all under the same kind of bracket of, well, we're incredibly strict on our branded terms. We can't use these types of words. We're very client centric. And it can be difficult. Take another example as well, like smaller kind of B2B. I worked with a B2B startup in cybersecurity and kind of risk assessment a couple of years ago. They were like the most lovely people I've ever worked with. They were incredibly fun, but the subject matter was incredibly dry, very compliance centric. And we definitely struggled a bit in terms of like when we look at like where we go in terms of what are the keywords they're looking for in terms of ranking, visibility on product wise, surface wise. There wasn't a lot of variety. the big players already kind of occupy the top spot. So we had to kind of frame it around, well, here's one like a search bucket we want to rank for, or a pillar of topic we want to go for. It's already kind of dominated by XYZ that have been around on the scene for many, many years. We can't be too, strict around this. We have to have a bit more fun. So I guess there's that side of it in terms of like, if you really want to kind of break through, and we can get into kind of more tactics around kind of AI overviews and things like that. But if they really want to kind of stand out a little bit, I guess, that's where you kind of have to kind of go beyond, I guess, what you're seeing in terms of that core product offering, and even kind of like the stuff that they might put out to partners that they're trying to kind of get leads from, that might be in their kind of branded like B2B literature, like brochures, or they're going to like industry kind of events in real life. It's still, the language is still quite dry. It's not the sort of stuff that you'll see kind of search for across the internet, across Google. You won't see much if you're mining the likes of, I don't know, SEMrush or Ahrefs or whatever it happens to be, outside of those kind of core kind of keywords that the service offering represents. So yeah, that's kind of it, I think, in a nutshell. There's that kind of, well, if we're going to make an impact here from SEO, we have to think outside the box. And also the data is showing us, yeah, like that's already kind of super competitive. So that's kind of a couple of things to start off with, perhaps, in terms of like framing your content approach for B2B, where there really is that strong level of compliance, strictness, and also competitiveness around what you're trying to do, I think.
Yeah, I think that competitiveness tied with like you said, the compliant nature of it can leave you in a pretty like narrow window to actually operate in sometimes, right? And you're like, well, I want to do something that's interesting and unique. And we often talk about information gain and freshness and uniqueness when it comes to creating content and what Google and search engines want to see from creators and from pages and sites. But it's a real thing. I've found, like, having conversations with clients of, maybe we should go this angle or try this thing, and they're a little bit hesitant. And like you said, that reframing, just to be able to twist it, tie it into something about their business, a KPI, a thing that they want to invest in. Oh, it relates to, that product range we were talking about last month. Well, you're about to launch that, and I think this can work for this industry. And being able to kind of twist it and reframe it in that way, I think really helps some clients relate to it a bit more. And obviously that's a whole other conversation about client communication and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. But I think that comes down to that, almost like trying to sell it to them, right? Getting that buy-in from CEOs, from marketing managers, from the clients, whether you're in-house or agency. That conversation, you really have to kind of plan it out, right, and have a plan going in. I would
Yeah.
hate to go in and just like pitch a, for want of a better phrase, a crazy idea out of nowhere, and then be like, I don't know, just give it a go. Just invest, like you say, if we're
Yeah.
working with Samsung, just invest hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into
Yeah.
this thing,
Yeah.
and we'll see how it goes. Like, you should
Yeah.
probably, like you said, do your research and get an idea of it, and starting with things like keyword research and understanding what people are already saying in that space can be a huge part of that, right?
Exactly, and if we're looking at a brand like Samsung or kind of other kind of huge enterprise type businesses that have B2B offerings, they're often, and it goes with any kind of enterprise business, which is another kind of area that I work across at the moment. You've got layers upon layers of bureaucracy. You've got kind of all the typical enterprise stuff that we come across, and we have to kind of navigate through as SEOs, joining teams together, getting people to understand the opportunity, getting buy-in. And you're often working with restrictive or restricting CMSs, tech stacks that don't allow us to do what we want to do as SEOs, to kind of the modern day stuff, for example, like richer content, or even things like deploying structured data markup and things like that. It can be very difficult to kind of even get a head start on that. So you really have to kind of take a step back, I think, and just look at, okay, obviously the brand has everything they need in terms of their positioning. They've identified a demographic, and here's another challenge of B2B as well, is that I think it was mentioned on one of your previous podcasts that if we're doing a service from a B2B perspective, the target audience already know their shit. They already know what they want. They have in-depth knowledge around this type of content, this type of offering. They know what the topic is. Going back to that example of cybersecurity or risk assessment, or even air conditioners. There are people out there that will know their stuff about air conditioners, and that is the challenge. So it's not a case of just kind of coming up with that kind of top of funnel content around, I don't know, like what are the top 3 cybersecurity risks in 2025 or things like that. Like, people will be clued up on that. that you're trying to sell your product into. So it's often a case of kind of going back and talking to product teams, talking to, I guess, marketing teams as well, and getting a sense of, okay, it's not obvious in the kind of keyword research we're doing, but what are the customer journeys that arrive that kind of steer people to kind of buy that product from that B2B standpoint? What are the pain points? That's the kind of key phrase I think that we might hear a lot of B2B, B2B type things, especially SaaS tools. What are the pain points that people are kind of looking for that they might not know about, but what does your product or service do? And what kind of language can we kind of think to address in our content offering or webinars or podcasts, whatever kind of format happens to be, to kind of represent those pain points that, again, it might not be immediately obvious in kind of traditional keyword research. It's just kind of understanding what the intent is and how to kind of, I guess, get across those pain points that the product or service is offering, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a reference to my conversation with Grace Frolic from a few weeks ago.
Yes, that's
Because we were
correct.
talking
Yeah.
about there we go.
Yeah.
Still got the brain, still got the memory. And that Grace and I were talking about user mapping and user journeys and stuff like that, and really getting an idea of the search journey and how much it's changed, right? Since you started digital marketing a decade ago, and I'm coming up on a decade now, not too far off, and it has changed so much in that time. And I know that's very much feel like it's been accelerated in the last couple of years, right? When it comes to LLMs and AI search and the advent of things like TikTok and Pinterest and all this kind of stuff. And for me, you get to that process of, okay, like you said, where are the audience? And exactly as you're saying there, and it was my experience with a client here at Candour, was like, what is the level of knowledge and understanding and relationship to that audience? Because you can do the whole write it to me like I'm a 6-year-old thing.
Yeah.
But I am somebody who is, I don't know how else to word this. I'm sensitive to being patronized. That is like the quickest way to irritate me is to patronize me. Like that is a quick way to piss me off. So if I'm reading something and I want, like you said, high level as in intellectual high level, not high level as in high funnel,
Yes.
deep
Yeah.
understanding, that kind of thing. And I get a best comparisons of air conditioners. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm an air conditioning engineer. I know every inch and every corner and every fan, and obviously I clearly don't know every tube and everything that goes into an air conditioning unit. Then you need to tailor your content to that audience and where they are as well, right? And I think that's when it comes to that specificity and that niching down into that element of it can let you do some really cool, interesting stuff, because then you get to say all of the cool, interesting things that you wouldn't necessarily say to someone who's a more general. Like you could pitch an air conditioning unit to me all day long. I live in Norwich in the UK. I probably don't need an air conditioning unit, right? And I also have no idea what you're talking about. But if somebody already knows what they're talking about and it's a commercial company that are looking to kit out one of their new stores as they expand across a particular part of the world, then they're going to want to know how it works properly rather than just, oh, it's just a bunch of tubes in a box. I don't know how it works. Like tailoring your language to that makes such a big difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that was definitely a mistake that I made when I first kind of, I guess, kind of traversed the shores of B2B. I mean, my background was kind of agency, and I kind of went in house, and there was a B2B element of that Samsung job I mentioned earlier, which was technically an in-house job, and I've had clients from then, and I would kind of approach it in a very kind of traditional SEO kind of, do keyword research around the topic. What are the hubs? What are the spokes around? I don't know, take a topic like third-party risk assessment or threats or kind of security threats online and things like that. And what are people searching for? What's the hub and spoke approach? And start building out the content from that. And I mean that would have value, I think, still, in kind of owning that space and sending signals to Google around your, I guess, to use a buzzword, topical authority around that particular content, and that can still kind of do quite well. We had a few articles for that aforementioned client around the basics, like what is this, what is that, risk assessment things by industry, so by education, by health, by, I don't know, like kind of policing and things like that, all kind of different public sectors, private sectors, and that was a way of building up credence to kind of, I guess, establish that brand more to Google from an SEO standpoint, and get, like, I guess, topical authority, again, to use that buzzword. But aside from the kind of top of funnel metrics, the traffic, the rankings, it didn't do a huge amount in terms of, bringing in actual kind of warm leads, customers that they were looking to address with the product offering they have, because we were talking about very, very basic kind of top level type stuff that was already inherent within the brand or inherent within the people that they were talking to. They were going to trade shows, they were interviewing people like literally kind of influencers in that particular, sector that knew their stuff so in and out. And I think there's still merit to that, but to that kind of approach of kind of doing the basics if you're starting out. I mean, in that case, the website was quite small, it was quite fresh, but the stuff that really worked and the stuff that we kind of had a bit more fun with, and this is kind of getting on kind of beyond the boring basics, I guess, is that they had the offering was like a SaaS tool that kind of assessed risks of third party suppliers, right? And I even saying that, I'm kind of boring myself and it sounds incredibly dry, but within that, how the engineering team have built that platform and the kind of people they work with, obviously kind of compliancy pending, there were so many, I guess, stories and statistics around that particular niche, like percentages of leaks or kind of, where are these trends across these different industries and what threats people are facing and all kinds of little things like that. And it was kind of building out case studies, I guess, building out kind of white papers were really useful for that kind of thing, like have real authority on fresh data that they had within that platform that, again, you wouldn't necessarily kind of think about if you're approaching a brand from scratch as an SEO consultant and looking at keyword data, looking at competitors. It's something that would often kind of pass us by, I think. So, I think it's just taking a case of really talking to product teams, really talking to, engineering, data science teams, and getting stories from the stuff that they're seeing in the front line. But I think, if you're repurposing that into long form data pieces, long form thought pieces that are really industry kind of thought leading stuff, and that is a good way, I think, to kind of stand out from the rest if you're trying to make an imprint.
Yeah, I love that, kind of taking it into the case study side of things. I think you're totally right. Most of us in SEO don't think of that as the first port of call, right? You obviously think of traditional stuff of writing blog posts and articles and all the usual stuff that goes into that. But building a part of it that is a more static part of the site, right? A page that is about the work we do. I've, funny enough, literally been writing case studies for Candour and our new website launch before we started recording this podcast, pretty much. So I'm in case study mode at the moment, funny enough.
Great.
And I think that's hugely relevant for that element of bringing in user experience as well, right? You're showcasing real world usage of your products, of your service, whatever it is, and bringing it together with, like you said, a story, and being able to tell a story in a long form that will work as an evergreen piece of content. And I think, as I was just saying, like the content feels like people, it has to be either a social media post or a blog post or a YouTube video or something. It's like, yeah, no, the content, the copy on your website is also content. And things like the About Us page and things like the case studies pages and all that kind of stuff, that's still SEO work that can bring in, like you said, actual leads and bring organic traffic and things like that. And I think that often gets neglected. But it is something, I think, tying into what you're saying earlier about the more traditional methods, that feels like quite a form of phrase, safe, nice, easy kind of option that I think a lot of us neglect for thinking about how can we do some crazy shit on TikTok. Like, well, have you done it? All of your case studies are 6 years old. Like, maybe you should go and review what your customers have been saying about you and talk to the other, the other businesses you're working with and what they have to say about you. Because for me, and I think this is true for a lot of users, whether you're representing a business or it's B2C, you want to see what other people are saying about that brand and see open and honest reviews, case studies, all that kind of stuff. That is a hugely powerful signal for Google and search engines as well as users. And I think that's almost like a nice little, feels like an easier pitch than a lot of the other like wacky stuff you could go for in terms of like, let's start a TikTok channel. And everybody goes, oh God, okay.
The world's UK's largest provider of air conditioning units. I'll doing mass stuff on TikTok. I just that kind of working actually. Can you imagine sort of people like
See, no, I've given you ideas now. I'm bad influence.
What
So,
temperature does this melt? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, from your experience, what are those kind of things that are where you can pitch those fun ideas to a client, a CEO, whoever it is, and take something that is very dry, say air conditioning, or my example was like decking and what was it? It was decking and paving slabs and things like that. How do you take something that is dry and make it fun and engaging for the users, and also something that you think the CEO or the people that will actually pay the money will actually care about?
So again, I think it just goes back to stories within the data that a brand might have, and what kind of person stuff that people care about in that industry at that particular time, and how that could be represented in content. So, I guess just like going back to that example of the cybersecurity kind of client that I had. I mean, that's again, it's quite a dry topic, and we kind of did the kind of usual SEO stuff of building out kind of pillar content around that particular product, that particular industry, which I said kind of did okay, but the real stuff that really did get in leads was that kind of white paper type for leadership content. Outside of that, what we did as well was kind of quite reactive stuff adjacent to that industry. So they had a kind of full-on engineering team that would often also blog about their discoveries in building a SaaS tool. So you had all the kind of stuff around targeting, I guess targeting the kind of B2B base of what does this tool do, what are the pain points, what are the industry, what's the state of the industry, risks, case studies, stats, etc. Alongside that, you then had kind of, I guess, like more, I guess, without sounding too technical, kind of more human side of the business, which I guess is that kind of soft selling type thing, which I don't think a lot of B2B brands do too much of. I could be wrong on that. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like what brands I've worked in before. We'll have blogs, for example, might try to make it a bit more humorous, but the engineering team that were building this tool, building the SaaS tool, had a lot of stories and a lot of kind of interesting kind of, I guess, discoveries in the languages they were using to build this tool, which wasn't actually kind of too topically relevant to what they were trying to sell. But interestingly, off the back of that, the highest traffic generating blog post of this particular client I mentioned earlier was something to do with floating points, which is, as far as I can tell, some sort of coding nuance. I'm not too technical on that front, but that was just it was part of a changelog update that their team were writing about. It was a bug that one of their engineers found, and they just wrote a post about it. And as a result, that blog post brought in the lion's share of organic traffic to that website. I don't know if they got leads off the back of it because it's not too tangential to what they were offering, but like that was often the kind of standout piece, and it was outranking things like GitHub and things like that. So I guess the point I'm trying to get across here is like there is a, again, it's going back to looking at internalizing what people are doing and what they're building, I think, and the message they're trying to get across and the journey that they're on. If I look at how people do that in the SEO community, and I guess we're all pretty good at this anyway, it's all in our interest to do this, but people who kind of are building these SaaS tools, building these B2B offerings, trying to sell to SEOs, for example, if we think about things like Also Ask, or indeed like Adam Gent, take an example, released an indexing insight tool, monitoring the indexing at scale, for example. He's writing content about kind of discoveries that he's finding out throughout the process of building that tool, adjacent to what we're all doing as SEO consultants. And it's got that kind of human feel to it as well. Similarly with what Mark does with Also Ask, it's all kind of like it's stuff that you're finding along the way, and that definitely kind of can help, I guess, navigate you through that kind of away from that kind of dry top subject matter, whilst also keeping it relevant, but also kind of finding kind of new outlets of content that makes you stand out a little bit. And I guess that's the key thing, is that a lot of these industries are so saturated and they're so competitive, and all the kind of I guess the pillar product service keywords that we might think about we want to rank for, it's going to be very difficult in a lot of these kind of highly regulated, risk averse industries or niches. So I guess that's where that approach could potentially help. It goes back to telling stories about what you're doing, internalizing things, and kind of representing that, and trying to find a link, I think, between that and what again, going back to pain points, what your product or tool is offering.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like taking what you're saying about Mark and what he's been doing with Also Ask recently. I find out that stuff most of the time when you guys do on LinkedIn as well. Like I'm not got much of the insider knowledge, and it will often be, we're launching a new feature or whatever. I know the recent one where we have the presence of AI overviews in People Also Ask
gives you a binary like 1 or 0 if there is an AI overview present. And that was from a conversation Mark was having with the guys over at ZipTie Dev and the guys who are doing brilliant work. I know I had Tomek on the show a few months ago talking about that process of tracking AI overviews and how that thing works and how to be aware of where AI overviews are popping up and all that kind of thing. And then tying that into People Also Ask data. It was two completely separate SaaS companies coming together to bring you a study for people that is relevant and interesting. Like, oh yeah, somebody messaged Mark on LinkedIn. Oh, I've seen AI overviews in People Also Ask the other day. And it was on the Also Ask page, and I replied like, yeah, we just launched a feature with that like literally 6 days ago at time of recording. Like we just launched that just now, and people are starting to notice that because that's the kind of data people are talking about. People are talking about AI overviews. People are talking about how much the SERPs are shifting. And it was like, yeah, okay, we'll share. We've done a experiment essentially. We've got this data. We'll share this data with another company, with ZipTie Dev in this case, or another tool or whatever it is. Combine our data with another keyword tool, see what we come up with, and we can both share that together. And again, I don't think that sounds too crazy and too risky, personally. Like you're in full control of the data that you share. You're not just giving them access to your database or anything like that. From what I understand, and this is me peeking behind the curtain from something I was not involved in, so bear with me. It was literally like sharing a spreadsheet of stuff and then being like, how does this correlate to your equivalent spreadsheet of stuff? Build a correlation kind of causation map and work it out from there. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. And it's done really well. A lot of people are suddenly realizing that not only is AI overviews appearing in People Also Ask areas, that you can actually get that data at scale from Also Asked. And if you didn't know, you learn it from that post as well. And I've worked with clients before where they're kind of like hesitant to work with another company or like, oh no, I don't know, we want to share any details with any of them. And I've had other clients who have done some amazing like digital PR work and got loads of links and loads of coverage from it when they just shared some data with another company. It's like, oh, you're a data visualization company and we're a like topographical audience mapping system. So you can see like how cars and people move across cities and across countries, and you can visualize data with your tool. Let's partner up and we both get a lovely bit of coverage. There's new content for both of us. And I was amazed at how kind of easy it was to convince people in that sense.
You definitely touched on something there as well with the kind of like, I guess, the soft sell element of it as well. Like you mentioned that Also Ask example of like, oh, I know that Also Ask does this now because there's a blog post about this update in AI overviews. Oh, it does that. It's not like cramming something down someone's faces about this product is the best. We do X, Y, Z. It's kind of like reactive pieces pertinent to something that's happening in that industry at that time that people are talking about. That you have, I guess, one of the challenges is getting that resource in place to do that at the right time and get it live at the right time. That's kind of one thing that you might run into in some B2B arenas. But again, yeah, it is getting that kind of like team together, thinking about what is a kind of contemporary issue that's happening at that time. So again, we're thinking about cybersecurity, third-party risk assessment. There's plenty of kind of things that happen in the news, like Uber hacks, or let's say M&S hacks that have happened in the past couple of weeks. That's all adjacent to what they're offering. If they can pull something together around the stats, around the who, the why, the what, and kind of do a bit more in-depth insight as to what you might see in the news, for example, using their insider insight and using the kind of knowledge around what they have around the industry, and at the bottom perhaps positioning something around how that particular tool or product could solve or could prevent these things from happening. That's just one example. Then that can be a really good way of kind of representing that kind of content, that kind of pain point content we've discussed a couple of times. And yeah, that's a fantastic example and Also Asked as well. I think it's just yeah, it comes down to kind of like subtle ways of, I guess, selling that tool in a way that kind of is agnostic to everyone and is interesting for everyone. Everyone wants to know about AI reviews at the moment. We're all kind of stopping to read up on what it means in terms of the future of our jobs, the future of how we do our jobs. And if there's someone that is owning that space and has some sort of solution, something we're trying to think about or communicate with clients or whatever it happens to be, then that's a great way of kind of delivering content outside of that kind of traditional kind of dry pillar-based stuff that you might often see across websites and B2B offerings.
Yeah, definitely. Something you touched on there, actually, I think is pretty much was the theme of the entire previous season of Search with Candour, which was getting other teams involved. And I think I hope you agree with me. I'm about to pitch it to you, Owen, but I think it's quite important to
Yeah.
get the marketing team or your SEO team or however divided you are into your little sections, to have conversations with not just the CEO and the rest of the marketing team, but talk to, especially like you said, if you're working with enterprise brands, they're going to have a legal team, they're going to have a branding team, there's going to be a separate pay team that might be, your working agency with an enterprise client, there might be 3 or 4 other agencies that are handling the other elements of
Yep.
marketing that you need to have conversations with. And for me, that has been like a huge conversation, that the whole don't work in a silo, don't just isolate yourself as an SEO, think about it as a whole for that
Yep.
client, for that company, for that brand, whether you're in-house, whether you're agency, you need to have those conversations with the other teams, regardless
Yep.
of how internal or external they are. What has your experience been with that kind of trying to bring everyone together? It can be very difficult to do at times, right?
It can be very difficult to do, and it's not exclusive to enterprise large businesses. You get that in all
Of
kinds of
course,
different
yeah.
settings. You get it in B2B startups. You get it in, I guess, sort of agencies as well. Yeah, it happens everywhere. And I guess, yeah, the more I kind of grow into being a kind of sort of consultant, independent consultant, the more I'm sort of framing myself around the offering around. Obviously, there is SEO, but there's that kind of, well, what is the SEO touch point across the business? It's UX, it's audience listening, it's product development, it's obviously technical stuff as well in terms of code and things like that. It's kind of branching out, and I think it's kind of a reframing of what that offering is. So if you're kind of coming in as the SEO consultant, I mean, that's an interesting one, because I get hired as an SEO consultant. I talk about this to sort of contemporaries as well. I tend to get hired as an SEO consultant because there's a budget or a need for an SEO consultant for a particular brand, and someone's looking for someone to bring in and serve that need. I often find the more I kind of go into a role or kind of understand a business or talk to different departments, that I'm obviously not just doing that. I'm kind of becoming the kind of, I guess, the communicator, the guy that kind of gets things moving, I guess, and kind of gets departments talking to each other. Almost like a digital lobbyist of some degree. That's a cynical spin on it, but yeah, I mean it can be very difficult, because you've got so much internal politics going on. You've got people that are kind of vying for their own interest. You've got people with differing KPIs, and businesses by their very nature are messy, right? Humans are messy. Humans are illogical. There's going to be gaps in communication, as I say, gaps in KPIs, but it's, I guess, to kind of distill that into how to approach that. I mean, it's so important. I think one area I would start with would be paid search, particularly if I'm coming in whether it's an enterprise type large business or a small business, and they've already got like a setup in terms of how they're approaching things like bidding on certain branded keywords or bidding on certain kind of core offering non-branded terms. That's one thing that you can find ways to complement each other quite quickly. I think in terms of, I guess, saving budget, if there is visibility on branded terms or they're bidding on. Obviously, the counter argument to that is SERP real estate and things like that. But there's conversations to be had on that, and also on generics as well. So if by chance a B2B startup is already performing well on a particular pillar or particular topic within that niche, that's great. The paid search team can potentially save money on that. And also there's insights from the other side in terms of, what types of keywords are driving leads and how could that potentially be repurposed into SEO content. So that's definitely one area I would start to look at straight away, would be to kind of like position myself within that. Not trying to obviously tread on people's toes, because, as I said, it's difficult. There's all kinds of things that are going on in terms of politics. There's strategies that exist. There's silos, there's structures in place. So you have to kind of work away at it. You have to kind of, I guess, pick your battles and choose your areas. But I guess I would always encourage that. And I guess second to that would be that sort of social media as well. I mean, a lot of what good B2B brands do, and myself as well, like I get a lot of engagement on LinkedIn when I do post. I see that you do as well in terms of what you're offering, and whether that's talking to clients or talking to SEOs, like that is a great funnel. That is a great kind of outlet for generating engagement, getting following. And I would, definitely look to kind of, find ways in which perhaps content from SEO can be repurposed on social channels or vice versa in terms of, sharing insights across data, So yeah, I guess that's quite a generic spiel in terms of saying, make sure you all work together in all different departments, but it's easier said than done. And
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
still something that I'm kind of working away on, despite working with some clients for many, many years now, where there's just some things that are just, oh, that's the thing, is it? I didn't know about that. Okay, cool. Oh, that's a new person that's doing that. All right, is that the new rules around that particular, I don't know, angle or keyword, or there's a new compliance here around that area of the business? Didn't know about that. Fine, that's okay. We'll just work through this, and I'll keep on keep him remaining calm, and we'll work together. But it's an ongoing process, I think, and there's a lot of stuff out there in terms of brilliant guys others have written, and we can perhaps put these in the notes. But in terms of kind of how to break down those silos as well, that other people have done brilliant work on. So, but yeah, it's definitely one thing I would look to kind of off the bat. I think trying to position myself beyond that straight away, just an SEO consultant, but also the guy who comes in and helps David Brent, kind of doing that across all the different departments. So yeah, like joining the dots up.
Exactly, yeah, and something you touched on there, like the startup brand nature of it, like pivoting to the other side away from enterprise SEO. I think for me, that's where I'm able to have a lot of fun, if that makes sense. Like with smaller brands, sometimes, and I'm sure every listener and viewer will relate to this, the small brands and the small clients are the most annoying and take the most time. And turns out the enterprise clients are like, yeah, cool, we trust you. And the people who are paying you £5 a week or whatever it is are just like, actually, no, we want to do what you're doing with every single penny of that £5 a week. But for me, when it comes to the startup side of things, especially in B2B, because like I was saying, you so often deal with huge companies like tech companies like Apple and Samsung and all this kind of stuff. How can a startup brand kind of do the David versus Goliath thing, right? And still get content that ranks, that brings leads, that brings traffic, compared to these huge brands that seem to, at least like in initial thought, seem to dominate the space?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, particularly with startups, as you said. I mean, like a lot of these B2B, as we've already kind of mentioned, these industries, they're hugely competitive. They're often very lucrative, so they are hugely competitive. There's a lot of compliance. There's a lot of kind of areas of blockers in the way that might stand in the way of getting that content ranking as quickly as you might expect in other areas. But I guess this is where I've had some success with AI reviews before. So it's kind of going back to those points we mentioned earlier about kind of having a bit more fun, I think, being a bit more conversational around the offering. And that can be, as we mentioned in the blog, it can be telling the stories from the data perspective, or from, I guess, kind of even things like white papers, for example. That these brands will often have gold lines of data, gold lines of, sorry, I'm edit. So I'm sort of running out. Don't know what I'm saying now. Sorry. I'll start again. Yeah, and I guess going back to AI overviews, like there is that kind of conversational element that I think some of these brands can look to leverage. We've sort of touched earlier on, kind of using those kind of data pieces to kind of tell a more interesting story about a brand, touching on pain points and things like that. And that's an area that I've had success in terms of like smaller offerings, smaller businesses, where like freshness of content, more conversational type content, with things like FAQ accordions at the bottom, for example, like answering that kind of long tail queries, that can often kind of get that visibility in AI overviews. And can lead to heightened visibility. I note your previous guest, I think it was Arena, was talking about this in terms of there's not always a clear connection between what shows up in AI reviews and what is ranking traditionally on search. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. That's definitely something that I would echo. So that's an avenue. I think it's an opportunity for savvy brands that have a more conversational voice, a more kind of, I guess, an up-to-date offering, perhaps offering something new within that B2B environment, that they can kind of leverage, I think, that kind of more long-tail conversational search. And so, yeah, I think, if they're struggling to rank within the top 10, whether it's because of, I don't know, backlink profiles or historical EEAT or topical authority, I think the AI overviews is a good opportunity for B2B brands to stick out if they're doing fresh and interesting content that is kind of hopefully hitting on some of the things we've discussed throughout the course of this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's that the agility of a small brand. I think, like you said, reactive stuff being a perfect example. This is a conversation I know our outreach and digital PR team have a lot with clients. Like, okay, yeah, you may not have the budget, you may not have the brand awareness or the share of voice, or however you want to put it, of these titans of your industry, but we can get pieces out 100 times faster. Coming back
Yeah.
around to what we were talking about 40 minutes ago, when it was like, you got to go through the legal department, you're going to go through this, you're going to all the layers of bureaucracy. If you're a smaller company and you're working with an agency or a consultant or whoever it is that knows their stuff and you trust them, you can get there first. And we talked about freshness and uniqueness and stuff, right? It can be, maybe you're not the most well-known competitor to a huge company, but if you get there first and you pick up coverage from other big sites or industry-specific publications, whatever it is, that can be the difference between getting traffic, getting leads, building relationships, building partnerships with other companies when it comes to B2B relationships as well. Like, my job as marketing and partnerships manager, I don't really do much SEO stuff anymore. Obviously, I mostly do the podcast, I do our events and stuff like that. But a lot of it is, what kind of companies do we want to work with, who want to sponsor the podcast, who want to work with us and sponsor our newsletter, all that kind of stuff. And for me, it's always looking into, okay, are they interesting? Do they align with us? Do they make sense? Like, do I have to jump through a million bloody hoops to get them to sign off for a 1 week newsletter sponsorship? Or are they just like, yeah, no problem, already paid? Like, I had a conversation, I'll give a huge shout out to Garrett French from Citation Labs, where before I'd finished my sentence, he had bought a package of things, like the sponsorship for the newsletter. And I was like, oh, okay. He was like, well, yeah, I'm the CEO. I just bought it myself. I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, lovely. And I'd previously been working with huge companies that were like, yes, we'll need an invoice at least 6 weeks beforehand and deal with this and deal with that.
Yeah.
And he was like,
Yeah.
oh, I just paid by card on the website. Is that okay? I'm like, yeah, man, absolutely. That's
Wow.
great. Let's talk content now. It's like, okay, perfect. and it was such a nice little moment for me to be like, oh yeah, working directly with a partner like that, where you can just get stuff done quickly, can make such a difference.
Yeah.
And even choosing who you partner with, like, right, when it comes to B2B stuff, the kind of partners and clients you want to work with can make a huge difference when it comes to that brand reputation and all that kind of stuff as well, right?
Yeah, and I think also, like, just going back to that agility point you made, that's so important. And again, one of the areas we touched on a few minutes ago around kind of moving beyond just being an SEO consultant in a business, like embedding yourself with the team that are involved in that process of creating content. And that can be a quicker process. Not always, but it usually can be a quicker process in smaller companies that can be more agile. So you might have to work with perhaps a marketing manager, a writer, or perhaps a designer for that content. Get yourself on their platform, get yourself within their Notion, their Jira, whatever it happens to be. And that's a way of kind of getting that buy-in, if you've got like a kind of content plan that's in that particular area, environment on Notion, and then you've got like a formula, in terms of briefs that you're using for content that can be, I hate to use the word scaled, but kind of, I guess, like repurposed, depending on what kind of topic you're looking to put out or blog you're trying to put out. And that allows you to be quite agile. I think that allows you to kind of get content out quickly, as long as you've got that process aligned already with the kind of key stakeholders, which, normally for smaller brands, there's fewer of them. It's just a case of you as the SEO consultant, you as the SEO supplier, making yourself obvious that you are doing more than just looking at technical areas or looking at keyword research. You're involved throughout that whole process, and it comes down to doing more and thinking about audience listening and brand building, which it can take a while depending on who you're working with, but that's kind of where I'd always want to try and get to. And yeah, that just completely wraps it up in terms of, once you've got that under the hood, then you can start to kind of be more agile and be more frequent in terms of the volume or quality of content you're putting out. And that can definitely help in that department.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to wrap us up a little bit and talk about, and we touched on it a couple of times, AI, LLMs, AI overviews, all that kind of stuff. From your experience, specifically looking at B2B stuff, because I think a lot of the conversations I have mostly focus on B2C, and I know we touched on it a little bit with the conversational nature of search at the moment. Do you think that the evolution that we're seeing, the growth, the change we're seeing in SEO and search at the moment is affecting B2B in the same way that it is affecting B2C? Is it having a more of an effect or less of an effect? Does that shift how you approach your strategies now that more people are using other platforms to search and things like that?
I think potentially yes. I think I'm going to do a massive cop out and say it's too early to say because we haven't got all the data yet. But I would say, based on what I've kind of learned from working with B2B brands, understanding the audience they're targeting and the knowledge that they have in terms of what they could be targeting, I would say that more conversational type LLM type model search, then it definitely has propensity to be more prevalent in kind of how people are finding B2B brands. I think the difficulty is for the kind of lesser established players is that like the nature of kind of LLMs around kind of brand mentions or kind of best brands in XYZ industry or best product or service in that niche, they're going to kind of pull out stuff that is typically referenced across the web or has, kind of high propensity of backlinks. I think that's difficult, and you've got that kind of limited scope in AI overviews. But I think just going back to that example that I used, where we kind of were able to kind of rank in the AI overview on a kind of relatively fresh content on what was quite a competitive area. It was like third party risk management was the example I keep giving. I think there's definitely opportunities for more visibility for B2B brands that are kind of smart around kind of conversational type content, conversational type queries, just given like more of the kind of like extent of knowledge that the audience has. So that I think is going to be quite an interesting bridge to gap, because if you're thinking about like traditional keyword research, as we talked about earlier, it's often kind of not encapsulating that entire funnel. It's not representing the entire opportunity, because there's so many kind of pain points and subtopics within those pillars that we often don't think about straight away. So it's kind of down to us, I think, to kind of think about, well, how are we going to better represent the offering that we're doing in search, in content, which I think, judging by the kind of evolving nature of search and GPT and things like that, is potentially quite well set up to kind of establish more visibility in those arenas. So I'm going to say yes, but more difficult for branded search, I would say.
You avoided it depends. You went for yes, but which I
think
appreciate.
That might have been the longest it depends ever, but yeah.
You didn't say those words. That's the important thing. That's the important thing. So let's wrap things up. I've got a fairly new segment here on the show where we give some recommendations to the audience out there, and I want to kind of start with something I think we've already touched on, but one quick little actionable tip that you'd recommend any viewer, any listener to start doing today.
Yeah, so this might be quite obvious for SEOs in the room or who might be listening to us, but it's something that I often discover when I start to engage with B2B clients, particularly those in the SaaS tool kind of offering. They often have quite in-depth help centers and FAQ centers and things like that, but more often than not always, are kind of no indexed or blocked on the rebels TXT file, whenever it happens to be. And those are often quite a good I guess, area to start with in terms of potentially repurposing that content, opening up for indexation, or indeed using that content to come up with more kind of long form articles on the blog. And that can even extend to things like changelog sections of websites. If it's a SaaS tool that's being built and they're giving product updates, they're often hidden from search crawlers. And I've kind of that's one of the first things I might look at if I'm coming to engage a new or a newish or even an established B2B brand that offers a particular tool or product or service, and they've got help centers, often on a subdomain like help dot whatever. That's often a place that's neglected. It's often quite rich in terms of user engagement, if indeed there are forums and things like that. But there are often teams that are maintaining these sections of the website that are kind of answering questions and updating them. And I think that there's a lot of potential SEO opportunity there that I think touches on a lot of things that we've discussed in terms of pain points, in terms of making content more exciting, and all those things that we've discussed. So that would be my go-to. If you hadn't thought about it already, help centers, changelog update versions of websites would be my kind of recommendation. B2B brands.
Nice. I was literally having a conversation with a B2B client on Friday, a few days ago, about that exact process, going through, even thinking about FAQs on commercial pages, thinking about FAQ approaches to the company as a whole, and doing some sort of like, brand management, brand reputation kind of stuff as well. I had an example of an e-commerce client a few years ago where the single most asked question was, is this brand legit? And they were like, should we address that on our product pages? Like, should we
Yeah,
talk about that, or should we ignore it? Like, it's all over Reddit, but like, should we talk about it? I'm like,
yeah.
that's a
And we
very
haven't
good
even got
question.
into
How do you
Reddit.
want to handle
Yeah, yeah. Fully.
That's always a dangerous one. If you start talking directly to Reddit, you're wading into the deep end there.
Yeah.
Is there a particular tool or piece of software or anything like that that you would recommend that you think maybe people aren't using enough or don't know enough about already?
I think people are using it, but I'm going to give a big shout out to SEO testing, which I use a lot for mostly my enterprise clients, where that buy-in thing does become a blocker, that proof of concept thing does become a blocker. It effectively connects to the Google Search Console API, and you can upload split tests, you can upload tests to individual URLs, say across huge websites where you've made a tweak to. You finally got that buy-in to kind of change that meta title. It's a tireless little thing, and you want to obviously prove that you've kind of done well in terms of clicks and impressions and things like that, and you can do it in bulk as well. So that is a great kind of, I guess, thing to have in the tool belt if you do want to kind of come back to stakeholders who don't necessarily understand SEO, perhaps need a quick visualization around a proof of concept. So that's kind of saved my bacon a few times in kind of recent years, working with clients in enterprise or indeed in kind of dry areas like B2B that need constant kind of proof of concept, constant proof of data. So yeah, SEO testing, get on that, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. Shout out to Nick, Ryan, Victoria, and the team. Like, we know those guys pretty well. We've been using SEO testing here. Funny enough, literally just talking about it the other day with my colleague Tom, who does most of the SEO testing for our clients. Like you said, being able to pitch something and then show an alternative and literally get the data of like, okay, over the next month, let's use this page title and this page title. And I have a theory that title A will do better than title B.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a conversation about it. And if it does, then we can carry on. And like you're saying, then we pitch a full campaign of like, okay, clearly people are more interested in this kind of language or in this kind of approach or this kind of angle. Here's how you justify that to then invest more and go further. Having that data can be so brilliant for that kind of thing, and getting that investment makes such a big difference.
Definitely.
And last but not least, not necessarily SEO related or marketing or anything like that, but basically something you've been enjoying recently. Could be a book, could be a TV show, podcast, video channel, whatever. I think we've had YouTube recommendations, we've had self-help books, we've had all kinds of stuff so far. So what have you been enjoying recently, Owen?
I mean, I'm one of these guys that doesn't necessarily kind of listen to a huge amount of kind of work adjacent podcasts or books, apart from Candour, of course. And so
Thank you, mate. Thank you.
But,
You saw the expression on my face then.
no, I mean, like, yeah, I do listen to an awful lot of podcasts while I work, and often kind of while I kind of take walks or kind of have a break for work and things like that. This morning I was watching. I found it went down this rabbit hole of watching. The comedian Limmy.
Oh,
He does
yeah.
like live. They've put out the Oblivion remaster, and he was doing a live stream of that. So I was watching that a little bit before I started work. Dangerous use of time. Wouldn't recommend that too much. I mean, I love history podcasts. I listen to the rest of history, rest of politics, an awful lot. I was was a little bit involved in politics in a previous life, so that is something that I find very interesting. And they've got a sister podcast. It's a kind of the Rest Is family, I think Gary Lincoln's group. They've got a podcast called The Rest Is Entertainment, which I'm sure many listeners are familiar with. It's Richard Osman and Marina Hyde, and they talk about things that have happened on TV, things that have happened in culture. So they talked about like Trump's tariffs with Hollywood, for example. That's kind of been in the news the past couple of days. But they often inadvertently talk about SEO, and they'll often kind of talk about trends that have kind of popped up. She used that Marina Hyde used to work for The Guardian, or I think still does work for The Guardian, one of the kind of co-hosts. And they'll often kind of talk about it without mentioning it directly. And I found this kind of a recurring trend in other podcasts too. So where they're kind of talking about how Google's algorithm works or AI overviews or whatever it happens to be. And I find that, I mean, not necessarily that it's kind of given me any particular value, but I find that interesting in how, I guess, like kind of industry adjacent people or people that are kind of digitally adjacent are kind of discussing or viewing our industry and viewing how things evolve on search engines, which is good because it's kind of more in the mainstream. These are very kind of popular mainstream podcasts, and I guess it kind of helps answer that question that SEO is not dead. So if Richard Osman's talking about it, so yeah, that's a good place to go. I think rest is entertainment is quite an interesting place to go to kind of see how industry adjacent people are kind of viewing cultural trends and how represents on Google and other places as well. So I find that quite a good, interesting listen.
I absolutely love it when SEO and digital marketing topics come up on other podcasts that I listen to, because much like yourself, I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm doing work. I'm listening to video game podcasts or music podcasts or whatever, millions of different things. I think my what's my latest? I always freak people out when I show them my subscribing. About 60 active subscriptions on my podcast currently, so a bit much, but yeah, loads of different topics, and I think that's when it comes to the rest is entertainment, like that behind the scenes stuff, the nerdy stuff, all the production stuff, I find so fascinating. Now, somebody who is on camera every week, it feels weird saying that, but like something that I host every single week, and I need to be aware of, like, how does lighting work? How does this camera work? Does the frame rate match the frame rate of the software I'm using? Like, how do they do that? How do they budget for that? There was a recent one where Richard Osman was talking about how the prize money for game shows works. Did you listen to that episode?
Yes.
And it blows your mind how like risky it can be sometimes. It was like, oh God, I'm showing my bad memory here. Like the one where you like bet on the different boxes and they fall through.
Deal or no deal? That Deal or no deal?
No, not Deal or no deal. No. Oh God, this is bad podcasting. Money betting that drops through game show UK. Will that work? No. Beat the Drop, maybe, I don't know. It might just be called Money Drop Live, I don't know. But there's a game show where you have to guess the answers by literally putting the money you have onto the answers, and the wrong answers, the bottom drops out and you lose your money, basically. So you can go all in if you know you're correct, or if you can spread yourself thin and maybe lose a bit of money. But if you spread yourself thin across 5 and there's one correct answer, you're still losing 4/5 of your money. So Richard Osman was talking about that and how it's like, oh yeah, that's all real stuff. Like in theory, you could win all of that money, but no one ever does, so they don't need to worry about it, because statistically, you're not going to win all of that money. And that's exactly how like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire works, and all that kind of stuff. Like there is real money behind it, but they are not paying out £1 million every other episode because they would go bankrupt. That's not how they literally couldn't do that in terms of budgeting. So him going into like, in theory you could, but no one does, because that's not how humans and statistics work. Like,
absolutely.
Oh yeah, there's probably like a whole data team behind game shows, and the nerdiness of like people solving like countdown and all this kind of stuff, and like blows my mind. So
that is interesting. I want to know, of your 60 podcasts, have you got anything that's sticking out at the moment? Any recommendations?
What have I been listening to recently? There's a show called Morning Somewhere, which I really like, which is Buddy Burns, who used to be the owner of Rooster Teeth, and his wife Ashley. They do just like a daily, every weekday, like news show where they talk about pop culture and tech and all that kind of stuff. I'll give a shout out to Within Reason by Alex O'Connor as well, which is he's a big YouTuber, but I mostly listen to as a podcast. He's a like atheist philosopher.
I've seen him on TV. Yeah, he's very smart. He's really young, isn't he?
He's like 25, and it melts my brain. I'm like,
I've seen him.
Oh, he's a smart adult, and he's 10 years younger than me. Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah, I've seen him like eviscerating like Piers Morgan and Richard Dawkins and people like that. That's pretty impressive. I know who you mean. Yeah, he's good.
One I've been to go to finish. I could do this all day, mate. You asked the wrong question at the wrong time. We'll be here for another hour. A gaming podcast I've been enjoying recently is the Mimics Veil, which is three guys basically talking about what they've been playing recently. And Alex, Ben just have a lot of chemistry, and it's very funny. They do maybe one of my favorite like closing segments. I love a good like recurring segment or a little quiz and stuff on a podcast. They do guess the intro, which is guess this game, and if one of them guesses it correctly, they play a piece of music from that video game at the end of the show.
Okay. Yeah.
And listeners and patrons can submit in topics and games, be like, oh, I really love, the battle theme for Rockman from Mega Man 3. So do Mega Man 3. And they just have to ask, like, but essentially yes or no questions, like, is it a platformer? Did it come out in the 80s? Was it published in Japan? All this kind of stuff.
Oh wow.
And it's,
Oh.
I love that like 21 question guess a video game thing. And then also getting the little reward of like, and here's the main theme from that video game at the end is like ticking all my nerdy boxes. So yeah, recommend those guys for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing.
How about you, mate? What else have you been listening to? Let's round things off as podcast recommendations as well.
I mean, I it's a combination of like silly comedy podcasts, so with all the kind of rested type stuff. So there's a podcast I listen to called Chatterbix, which is it's like on like 3 times a week. It's with Joe Wilkinson and David Earl. I like
nice.
it because it's completely kind of like it's unscripted. They're deliberately aware of how kind of messy it is, and sometimes they just can't be bothered, and they're just like, what we're going to talk about today, like, that will fill 20 minutes. Also kind of bonuses for the various, so I'm from West Sussex originally, not far from Brighton, and I think one of them I think Joe lives in Brighton, and the other one is originally from the town I grew up in, and there's often kind of like really random niche references to kind of like places and things like that, which I quite enjoy. So that I listened to like Louis Theroux's got a podcast. I think he's just started a new series out and the first guest was Bella Ramsey from Last of Us, so that was quite interesting to listen to. But
I love them trying to do American accents at each other. That was
Yeah,
bizarre
and
excruciating and hilarious at the same time.
Yeah. No, big fan of all of that. I guess it's like a combination. I think my all-time favorite podcast there, and I think it stopped a while ago. It was this niche one about 90s football, and it was called like Quickly Kevin Will He Score, and it was like Josh Widdicombe and a few other people, and they would have like guests in from like the 90s, but it was often like kind of really random stories that were just like so 90s in terms of like being overly naff or overly kind of cliched. And they did a whole segment about the football manager / old retired football player Steve Bruce wrote a series of football-based detective novels in the 90s whilst he was starting out as a football manager, and they're so bad, like as if Alan Partridge wrote detective fiction based around fictional football grounds across the northwest of England, and they are just hilarious, like definitely worth a listen. So yeah, Steve Bruce books. I would, if anyone wants to kind of like lighten up or needs a few hours of kind of joyfulness, they've done individual episodes on each chapter, but there's like summary episodes of the entire books as well, with comedians just dissecting it, and it's just hilarious. So definitely recommend that.
Amazing. Yeah. I will not recommend any more podcasts, I hasten to add, but you've led me off on probably my most listened to podcast. I'm a big pro wrestling fan from
cool.
the back in the day and still currently. The Attitude Era podcast with
cool.
Those 3 guys. So Kevin, Adam, and Billy just like have the best chemistry, and they did a series. A lot of it is now public because they released a lot of their Patreon content during the pandemic to be like, we can't get together and record new content, so here's some of our exclusive stuff to keep you going, which is exactly what I did for my movie podcast. Funnily enough, we did the exact same thing. But they did, funnily enough, what triggered my memory of it is reviews of wrestling books, so autobiographies or biographies of wrestlers, and also the best one, which is and this is very niche, I'm aware, I'm sorry, plenty of SEOs are probably tuned out by now, the Undertaker's brother Kane, who is in theory a tortured, like burnt demon guy from wherever, had a fictional origin story written as a novel. called
Really?
Journey into Darkness. Yes,
That
actual
is very
published,
niche.
and it is unbelievably bad, spectacularly bad,
I've got to
and
check that out.
fundamentally contradicts a lot of things that happened in real life and things that wrestling has said
Wow.
since. But they reference it like every other episode because it is
Oh
absolutely
God.
mad.
You've just like
To the
opened up
point
a
to the
whole, yeah.
Oh, mate, that is a new rabbit hole to go down into. And it's become the point where if something is particularly bad or particularly weird, they describe it as, and they abbreviate Journey into Darkness to JID. So it's just, oh, that's a very JID like phrase, or oh, that was quite JID of you. It's like, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's become like the funny little in joke thing that's been
Oh
going
God.
for
Okay. So
five years at this point.
if I was to pick up that, but I was into wrestling, at that time of Attitude Era, kind of, yeah, I guess we're about the same age, so that was kind of, yeah, the time got into wrestling, early 2000s, late 90s. So if I was to
Yeah.
read that book, I've got knowledge of Kane, obviously. Would that immediately be so bad? Like, would that kind of resonate? Or would I have
Don't read the book, just listen to their podcast episodes.
Okay,
I think
okay, yeah.
they did 3 episodes that like covers the whole thing, and then I think they did like a anniversary one where like 8 years later they went back and did it again and was like, what do you remember from this absolutely batshit story? So yeah, AE podcast, as usually abbreviated, Attitude Era podcast, is one of my absolute faves. And if you want an excuse to get back into pro wrestling or relive the glory days in many ways, it's a lot of fun.
I
Anyway,
will. Thank
this
you.
is not this kind of podcast, but I appreciate you appreciate you humoring me, Owen.
No, thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you. I've got loads of notes on podcasts to listen to now. That's a great takeaway. Thank you.
that I feel like that happens. Pretty much anyone who ever has a conversation with me goes away with like, "Oh, I got some podcast recommendations from Jack." I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much how I work. But if people do want to go and check out all those books and all the silly podcasts and stuff, people want to go and check out you, Owen, and follow you and all your awesome work. Like you said, you're posting on LinkedIn, you're sharing all your case studies and details and career stuff and all that kind of thing. Where is the best place to find you and your work?
Yeah, so I'm kind of blessed with a kind of slightly unorthodox name, insofar as it's incredibly Welsh spelt. Although I don't sound too Welsh myself, as you can probably pick up by now. But if you just search me, like I've got a website that I kind of will occasionally blog from, in terms of, like, I guess, going back to the kind of crux of the conversation around kind of pain points and things like that, and kind of case studies that I come across, weird stuff in my travels. So I've got a website where you can kind of, I guess, find out all about me and services. There's the whole China thing as well, which I was quite known for early in my career as well, which perhaps we can talk about another time. But yeah, I'm more active on, yeah, as you say, LinkedIn, Blue Sky. I do have a presence on Twitter, but I don't use it anymore, for reasons. But yeah, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, website. I'm around.
Very nice. I appreciate you being part of the double-barreled SEO crew, joining the 3 named SEOs and Mark Williams Cook, Owain Lloyd-Williams,
Yeah,
Daniel Foley Carter, Kyle
yeah,
Rushton McGregor, Jack
yeah,
Chambers Ward. There's plenty of us around, and we've got our SEO sorted. Just
yeah.
add another name in there. Like, there's a million Jack Chambers. Like, who cares? Jack Chambers Ward. There's
Yeah,
only one.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that,
yeah.
there's a little branding tip for you folks. Double barrel your name.
Double barrel your surname, definitely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was Lloyd-Williams' surname is quite old, and, like, I keep getting told this by my dad, like, kind of like has a history to it. It's just quite a common surname if you go to Wales, I think. But I like to think I'm the only one doing SEO with that name, potentially. So,
There
hopefully
you
it
go.
works out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, mate. It's been a really fun conversation.
No, thank you. Cheers for having me on, Jack. Thank you.
And that wraps up this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did when I had a chat with Owen. And please do, like I said, go and follow Owen, what he's up to at the moment. He posts some great content around LinkedIn and on his website and things like that as well. So please do go and follow Owen. Links for everything, of course, are down in the show notes or the video description down below. Everything I mentioned, Owen's recommendations, all the bits and pieces we talked about will be linked there. So go and check those out if you haven't already. over the next few weeks, I have a stellar lineup of guests. I have some returns to the show as well, which is very exciting, including one of my favorite guests and one of my favorite people to follow to talk about analytics. Dana DiTommaso will be back on the show once again, talking all about basically what is the state of GA4 right now? What has Dana been seeing when she's doing her audits and looking at client accounts and things like that? What are the most common mistakes people are making on GA4, and how do we fix them? It's a great conversation and a really nice follow-up to our conversation last year about GA4 and the change in attribution regulations and all this kind of stuff that happened last year. And yeah, if you're struggling with GA4 and wondering what the hell is going on, Dana is the right person to follow, and it's a great, really interesting conversation with Dana, and that'll be coming up in the next few weeks. Of course, I have plenty of other amazing guests coming up as well. Not only that, Mark Williams-Cook will be back here in the studio to give us a recap of all the latest SEO news and posts and topics we're talking about recently, and I will have some more Candour folks joining me in the studio as well to talk about some things they're very passionate about as well. So stay tuned for all of that coming up across the rest of the month. And of course, we'll be carrying on throughout the rest of 2025. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Have a lovely week.